A few years ago, while I was in college, I would deliver pizzas on my off days from school to make some extra cash. The shop I worked at was in a busy town. You would think the lunchtime shift would be worse than the dinner rush, but I made substantially more money delivering during lunch, mostly because it would usually be large businesses ordering pizzas for their company, and most of the time they would tip nicely. One afternoon, we got an order from some new insurance company that I had never heard of before, which for the record is not really a red flag. Once I started delivering pizzas to businesses during lunch, I found out that I didn't know most companies that I delivered to. And trust me when I say, a lot of these places could use some better marketing, but that's another story for another day. So, I took the order and plugged the address into my GPS. It wasn't far from the shop. The company had an office in a building that had been recently renovated, and right in the center of town was the small business park complex that was filled with old buildings and offices. It was only in the last few years that most of the spaces had been rented out. During the time the story took place, there was still a lot of available spaces in these buildings, and this wasn't the first time I delivered to this business complex, but it was the first time I delivered to this specific building of the complex. It was toward the back of the complex, and there was probably 10 cars in this massive parking lot. I walked inside the building, and I swear I felt like I was in an episode of The Walking Dead or something. It was just so creepy. It was quiet in a very desolate lobby. It had the vibe of an abandoned mall, and what made it more creepy was just the overall atmosphere of the interior of the building. It was dim inside, almost uncomfortably so. There wasn't a person in sight. The aesthetic of the place was all this tile that looked like it was supposed to be marble. There was eerie elevator music playing in the background that echoed slightly because of the lack of anything inside this big open space. And once inside, you walk into the center of the building and into a large atrium where you're able to look up and see all the floors. I can't remember exactly, but I want to say the building was 6 floors. I looked at my order form and I couldn't read my own handwriting. I tried to recall, and I thought the woman on the phone said that it was on the 5th floor. I was purely guessing because the lobby didn't have any type of secretary or directory. I took the elevator to the 5th floor, still listening to the creepy elevator jazz that seems to be playing everywhere in this damn building. The elevator opened to a small walkway where I was able to look over the railing and down the atrium where I had just been standing a minute ago. I could go left or right out of the elevator, and both directions seemed to lead really nowhere. And by that I mean the halls were dark and I couldn't see any light protruding from the shut doors that lined the halls. Since I'm left-handed, I always opted to go left when I'm faced with these types of choices. A few steps down the hall, the lights above my head turned on and I felt a little relief. The lights in the hallway were motion censored, which made me feel better about the dark halls. However, I kept walking down the hall and every office appeared to be shut and vacant. After a minute or two, I decided to do what I should have done in the first place and just call the company that placed the order. It rang once, and then I hung up the phone because I heard someone shout, "Hey," from the end of the hall. I looked up, and a man with a sweatshirt was waving me down to an office at the end of the hall. He said in a very shaky voice, "Them pizzas for me?" And without thinking, I just nodded and said, "If you ordered 5 large pizzas, then I'm your guy." The man laughed, and I started walking toward him. As I was getting closer to the guy, I noticed that the room behind him was completely dark. The door was cracked, but there was a small window on the side of the door, and it appeared that the lights were off. I stopped about 6 feet away from the man and cautiously said, "Are you sure you ordered 5 pizzas? It looks pretty closed up behind you." The man nodded and said, "Oh yeah, everyone is in the back conference room. I like to turn the lights off to save power." I tried not to judge a book by its cover, but this man did not give off the vibe that he sold insurance. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt and jeans, and from what I could see in the shadows, his skin and teeth just looked disgusting. And against my better judgment, I followed him to the door, and when I was in the doorway, I knew I messed up. I looked inside the office and saw that it was empty and a completely vacant room. Before I could react, the man slammed the door in my face, knocking me and the pizzas over. I got up quickly, a little disoriented, and as I got to my feet, The man grabbed some 2x4 or some other large wooden piece from behind the door and just absolutely rocked me in the face with it. I was still conscious, but I was seeing stars for sure. I pretended to be unconscious, which I know may seem like a coward's move, but I didn't want that man to continue beating me, and I thought in the moment it was a good idea. I could not think straight, though. After all, I had no idea if the man had a weapon beyond that, or if there were other people inside that could potentially attack me if I started fighting back. While I was on the ground, the man starts to rummage through my stuff. He took my wallet, ripped off my gold chain from around my neck, and I could hear him running away. While on the ground, I could hear my phone vibrating from my left side. I must have dropped my phone when I dropped the pizzas. Otherwise, I'm sure this man could have taken that as well. I crawled over and grabbed my phone. It was the number that ordered the pizzas. I didn't answer it because I was convinced at this point that this was all some setup and that if I answered the phone, they would summon me to another part of the building where I would just get jumped again. I ended up staying on the ground and called the police, who did thankfully show up very quickly. While I was waiting, the number kept calling me, and I finally answered, and it was a kind young woman asking about the pizzas since they'd been waiting for about an hour at this point. I get the correct floor and office number from the woman, which was floor number 4, and went to the office with that police officer. As it turns out, this was a real office and a real order, and after a little initial investigation, it turns out the man who jumped me was just some homeless guy who was probably squatting in the empty offices. He saw me and just took an opportunity to strike instead of hiding. The bad news is, they never caught who did it. Unfortunately, this type of crime happens a lot in my hometown, and it's hard to determine who jumped someone based on a very little description and evidence. But there is good news, though. The company that placed the order felt so bad they ended up giving me a huge tip for my troubles. Not only that, but after the attack took place, the company installed a fob for the entrance and a security guard at the front door. And to my knowledge, this man was the last squatter that building ever had.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. This happened less than a month ago. I'm a petite female in my 20s. I'm currently living in Mexico to escape life, a little after postgrad in a city that is not known as a dangerous place. A lot of foreigners live here, and I haven't heard any safety concerns. I'm living with my cousin who works from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. But houses are in a pretty good area with a school, nice hotel, and Starbucks within walking distance. Just to give you an idea of how unexpected this was. The incident happened while my aunt was visiting us from Mexico City. She stayed home all day with me, while I usually studied or watched Netflix. On this day, I was planning to have a chill day since I had woken up at around 11:30 a.m. I was watching something on my computer when I started to hear some loud pounding, like someone was working on something with a hammer. This was around midday. I thought my aunt had let some repairman in to do some work. I was under the assumption my aunt was still in the house, so I wasn't too worried and continued to watch my show. The hard noise stopped, and I heard 2 male voices talking casually. This made me feel more confident that they were there to fix something. I get up from bed to fetch my phone, and I don't have any service plan down here to message my aunt on Facebook to see what's going on. I didn't get a reply from her, so I just took it as she was busy and go back to lying in bed to not thinking of anything of the noise. 5 minutes later, I hear footsteps coming up the door. Take in mind, I'm lying in bed with my back to the door. When the door opens, and I see a man. He was a pretty normal-looking guy with facial hair and dressed rather cleanly. Like if you saw him in public, you wouldn't think anything negative about him. As soon as he saw me, he shut the door and went downstairs. Then I heard another huge noise that I led to realize was him slamming the front door shut. My room is first room above the stairs, so the first thought was that this repairman accidentally opened my door. I thought he was trying to get access to our patio. I was a little confused, but again, didn't think anything of the situation. I slowly walk downstairs calling my aunt's name, but I get no response. As soon as I make it down the stairs, I hear my aunt in a panicked voice saying that they robbed us. They took the TV. She forgot to lock the first iron door of the house, which made it easy for them to break into the second door. She said that when she was walking by from the store, she noticed someone by the house. She asked him what he wanted, and he said he was looking for a teacher, and he got into a car with the other man and left. She didn't notice the TV in their car or anything suspicious until she got to the house. She mentioned that someone had rang the doorbell before she left to go to the store. When she went to check, no one was there. She believed they'd been watching her and my cousin, so when they opened the bedroom door, they were caught off guard and dipped. It's really frightening to think what could have happened. They didn't get scared off by seeing me. The cops came and were then telling me that they often kidnap girls or rape them. I know I got lucky.
It was around the time when I went on a trip with my family at Kathmandu, Nepal, one of the southern Asian countries. Despite being in our neighboring country, I never knew much about their cultures and people, and that was my first visit ever. The first thing we did upon reaching and checking into our hotel was to get plenty of sleep, since our entire body felt sore from all the traveling. We did wake up once, that was to have, but after that we went back to sleep. The next morning, Mom woke up earlier than usual, and we headed to the nearest restaurant for breakfast. The plan was to visit Pashupatinath Temple first, but since it was to open at 10 and we were 2 hours early, we decided to walk around in the nearby park. We still got to the temple pretty early and spent our time there till lunch. We were only able to visit 2 places on the first day. The second one was Garden of Dreams. Anyway, for the rest of the week, we were able to visit Buddha Stupa, Hanumandoka, Talabatwajani Temple, and Patandarba Square. We couldn't even catch our entire week just went like that, and the next day we were back to flying to India. I had a girlfriend named Pooja, so I wanted to buy a souvenir for her, but I was unable to do that with all my family members hanging out together. But since it was the last night here, I didn't want it to go to waste. There was a market a few meters distance from the hotel, so I told my parents that I was going to buy something for my friend and headed outside without hearing their response, because I knew they would want to either tag themselves or send a sibling along. Upon reaching the market, I immediately started looking around stalls and shops for something she would love, but no matter how much I looked, I couldn't seem to find anything that would suit her taste. So I went ahead a bit and kept looking until I realized I'd gotten lost. Yeah, grown-ass man being lost in a market. Something to laugh about, right? I thought so too at the moment, though I thought I'd be able to find my way back if I traced my steps to the hotel. But thinking that was even worse idea since I'd moved from stall to stall, I didn't even notice which way I was going and which turn I was taking. All the stalls, and not to offend anyone, but the shopkeepers looked similar to me, which must be because it was my first time seeing them. The more I traced it back, the more I felt lost. That was when the market ended, and I had a feeling that I was going in the right direction, so I kept doing that. But I guess it was not just me who took notice of me getting lost. I turned around to see who was following me, but I couldn't tell between the crowds. I started walking with long and fast steps and feeble attempts to lose the person behind me. But that led me to a place with many alleys. I had seen such alleys back in India as well, but I never had to think about getting lost since I knew where each of them would lead. And even if I was new to any of them, I would always find my way somehow. That doesn't seem to be the case here, since I had no idea which one to take, and there was no option to take a risk looking at how I had possible robbers or murderers on my trail. As I was trying to look around the way back, I saw a guy around the age of 40. His height must be around 5 feet 6 inches, and looking at how I was 6 foot something, I could take him down easily. But I knew better than to judge someone by their appearance, especially in a place far from home. At first, I didn't know for sure if this was the man who had been following me since the market, but when even after taking a few turns, I could still see him walking behind me, I was sure that he was the guy. as I mentioned earlier, I didn't know much about Nepal, so I have no idea if the alleys and streets ahead of me were safe or not. I was having a constant fear of someone jumping out from nowhere and stabbing me just so he could rob me. At that point, I started to regret rushing out without bringing someone with me. Things started to get weirder when I noticed the man's eyes constantly glued on me, and his lips forming a faint smile as if he was enjoying the chase. I turned back my head looking ahead of me and speeding up even more. For some reason, I could feel that I had been passing through the same alleys again and again, except I couldn't find my way out. I felt his speed increase along with mine, and this time he said something in Nepali, but I couldn't understand what he was saying except the part that said hi. That was when my phone's ringtone started ringing. I couldn't believe I was so frightened that I'd completely forgotten about the phone in my pocket. I answered it, and from the other side, my father's loud voice met my ears, asking me in anger where I was and why I was taking so long. "I'm lost," I said in a slow, hesitant voice, and this time I was met with silence from the other end. "And someone is following me for about an hour now," I said again, "and instead of getting angry or scolding me, send me the location, I'll be there," he said in a calm voice. "I think I've gotten too far from the hotel. Why don't you show the hotel's location? I'll find a way." I was again met with silence, but after a few seconds he responded with, and then the very same minute, live location was sent to my phone. The man was still following me, but I followed the route this time, and within a few moments I was standing in front of the hotel where I found my entire family standing outside waiting for me. Worry was written all over their faces. I turned back to see the man wasn't there anymore, so I went back to the hotel room with them. Now don't think for a second that I didn't get a scolding later on. It's not just my father who scolded me. My mother and both of my siblings kept scolding me back to India. But despite all that, I'm thankful to God that I was able to make it back safe to them. Otherwise, only God knows what could have become of me now.
A little bit of backstory. I went to Miami earlier this year. Didn't know a lot of people there, but I still went. I was 20 at the time and not really jacked, but I know how to hold myself. I got there on a Saturday, and I knew that weekend nights at the beach are where the fun things happen. Night eventually rolled around, and I took an Uber to South Beach. I walked around for about an hour and a half and found a bench to sit down at to check my phone. As I'm sitting down minding my own business, a person walks up to me and sits on the same bench as me. I didn't think much of it. The place was packed, being that it's a weekend night. A few minutes pass by, and he starts up a conversation with me. I will refer to him as Dude. He seemed like a chill person, around the same age as me, average build. I'm usually really good at reading vibes, and I didn't get any negative vibes from him. I tell him that I'm new here, that I had arrived in Miami and that I didn't really know anyone here. That was probably my first mistake. My phone had started to die, and I also needed to use the restroom, but the bars and restaurants there won't let you use the restroom unless you are a customer. So I was shit out of luck. The dude told me that he has a place not far away from here and offered to let me come over to use the restroom and charge my stuff for a few minutes. Looking back now, I should have declined the offer, but I did take him up on the offer. We get to his place, and as soon as I enter, I got really odd vibes. His house was just giving off negative energy, but I don't want to pay it any attention. He tells me where I can plug my stuff in and shows me the way to the bathroom. So after using the bathroom, I walked back into the living room and sat down. My plan was to let my stuff charge for 15 to 20 minutes, then leave. The dude sits down beside me, and we actually had a pretty good conversation at first. He just seemed like a chill person who was trying to be nice. About 5 minutes after he sat down beside me, that's when things took a turn. He gets up, walks to the kitchen and pours 2 glasses of vodka. walks back to me and hands me one. I didn't want to come off as rude, so I took the glass and just held it. I wasn't trying to get drunk, especially around someone I just met. After he realized I wasn't drinking, he kept on trying to get me to drink. He kept saying stuff like,
"Come on, I just want to help you relax some."
I told him I didn't want to drink, and he got visibly upset. He started saying stuff like,
"I let you into my house and you can't take a shot with me?"
At this point, my gut was telling me to get the fuck out of there. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure his intentions weren't as pure as I had originally thought. As I was trying to figure out a way to leave without upsetting him, he starts to compliment my looks. As someone who was sexually assaulted 2 years ago, my fight or flight response was kicking in. I got up and acted like I was looking for my wallet in my backpack. I acted like I couldn't find it and that I probably left it at the beach. I said that I was going to walk back to the beach and that I would return when I found my wallet. And no, I definitely didn't plan on returning. I packed my stuff, and as I was doing so, the dude started laughing. It was such a demonic laugh, I'll never be able to get it out of my head. I bolt it out of the door and get to the sidewalk and start walking away. I'm not even off the block yet, and I hear his door open back up. The dude starts speed walking towards me as if he was following me, while he was still laughing demonically. My first thought was, okay, well, this is a serial killer. I'm about to be killed. I started to run. I don't know exactly how far I ran, but it was at least 5 blocks. Once I knew he wasn't following me anymore, I spent $10 on an Uber to get me far away from the area. The night was still young and I knew the nightlife would still be active on the beach. So I went back to the beach, just about 10 miles away from my original location, just to make sure if he went back there looking for me, that he wouldn't find me. To the dude who was trying to push himself on me, screw you.
I grew up in a place called Derry in Northern Ireland. You know that Norn Iron meme that's been going around? Hey, that's us. Anyway, I came up on a housing estate called Carn Hill. A wee bit rough, but generally an alright place to live. Carn Hill is basically like 9 or 10 little clusters of houses on like a ring road, but all with lovely green spaces between them. You could run about them, play football, just generally messing about, you know, and most of the rest of the estates could see you, so your mum always knew someone was keeping an eye on you. Carn Hill took a lot of guff from the British Army during the Troubles, so naturally we had a big IRA presence here too. And when the violence ended, not all the paramilitaries decided to give up the cause. Not only that, but younger lads who glorified all that bollocks wanted a piece of it too, and so they joined continuity organizations like the real IRA or Ogli Neherin to carry on the fight. But who do you fight when there's no British soldiers around no more? You can't really go around shooting the police because, as much as we don't like to admit it, they do keep us safe from mad Huns when it suits them. So, who do you go for? Who are the enemies of the community? If you're a real IRA man, the answer is obvious. You go after drug dealers. And an even bigger prize, you go after those that predatorize children. Historically speaking, the IRA used to do most of their punishment beatings or shootings in the middle of the night and in the middle of nowhere. Seeing them be violent towards people who weren't outright Brits was bad PR, but after the continuity lot started targeting dealers and creeps, PR was a must-have. They wanted people to know that they were doing it, and they were proud of it. And what's most relevant to my story is that they wanted people to see it. So it's 2010, I'm 13 and I'm playing out with my friends during this lovely summer's evening. It's humid out, but with just the right amount of breeze, and I'm honestly dreading my mum calling me in for the night because I'm having such a good laugh. Normally she'd call me in, and I'd always manage to haggle a few more minutes out of her. It'd be this playful back and forth of 5 more minutes, Mom, please, and hey, go on then, but here, Make sure you're no longer than 5. The bath's running for you, so it is. Only this time, my name gets called, and when I give my usual pushback, it's immediate, like, "Selena, get your backside in here right now, young lady." My mom didn't shout, she barked it. And she was about to go through me for a shortcut, and I knew she most definitely wasn't kidding on. I say bye to my friends, then notice all their mums are coming out too, calling them inside. I was only 13, but I wasn't soft, and I quickly worked out that Mum was so agitated because 4 men had appeared on the green and were walking towards the wide open spot in the middle. As I reach my mom, she just tells me, "Go right up to your room and don't come out until I say." Now my bedroom faced the street out the front, and all the commotion was out the back, so I only half obeyed my mom by heading upstairs, but then creeping into my parents' bedroom at the back of the house so I could watch what was going on. As you just heard, the entire green was deserted except for 4 men. 2 were younger lads, 2 were a bit older. One of the older fellows had this terrified look on his face and was being flanked by the 2 young lads with their faces covered, who every so often had to kind of push him along like he was dragging his feet. It was clear he didn't want to be there, but I could only wonder as to what had him so spooked like that. Anyway, right when the 4 men reached the middle of the green, they stopped. The older one at the back, who also had his face covered and was obviously the fellow in charge, started shouting all this stuff that I didn't quite understand at first. But then it became clear that the man they had with them had done something really bad, and it dawned on me that they were about to publicly punish him for it. But then, just when my sympathy for the man had reached its peak, the fellas with their faces covered said one of the few things I actually really understood, that the man they were about to punish was someone who had touched a child. I think that might have gotten a gasp out of just about everyone in the estate, and it completely shifted the dynamic of what we were witnessing, because as much as what happened next was grim, I now understand that the real horror of what happened that day was that those men had the consent of the community to do what they did. Most people in Northern Ireland are tired of violence, but the vast majority of us, older and younger, just want to live our lives in peace. We've lived through more than 100 years of struggle, both north and south of the border, and if you can manage to elicit a bit of bloodlust from us, trust me, that's no mean feat. Then right before our eyes, the younger men forced their prisoner onto his stomach and held him in place while their leader took what looked like a gun out of one of his jacket pockets. Then bang. The man screamed like nothing I'd ever heard before. It was blood-curdling. I know that's cliched, but it's true. It was a sound I found myself physically recoiling from, and from what I understand, this first shot was to the back of the man's kneecap. Bang. Another shot, and another scream. The second sounded sadder than the first. I know that sounds weird, but it was more like a groan than a scream towards the end. Maybe he just didn't have the breath in his lungs anymore, who knows, but what's for certain is that this shot was to his other kneecap. He'd probably never walk properly again, not for the rest of his life, but I doubt that there was a single ounce of sympathy on their entire estate. I don't think they have flinched if they had blown his head off, but they didn't blow his head off. They shot something else off instead. Bang. Just when I thought I'd heard the most horrifying scream in my life, the third one tops it all. It was this undulating howl up and down and rasping at the end, that all you could hear was sobbing, this ugly sobbing as the masked men stood up and walked away. I don't really know what I was expecting to happen next. I mean, a man had just been shot 3 times. There could be little doubt that he was in danger of bleeding to death. You'd think someone in a good Christian community like ours would bother to check on him, regardless of the crime he'd been accused of. But no. It took half an hour for ambulance crews to reach us, and this isn't a place where the average response time is about 10 minutes. To me, that means people actually debated for a full 10 to 15 minutes whether or not they'd actually call for help for that guy. There were people on the estate who were happy to let the man die in front of their children that day, based on pure hearsay. Well, I say hearsay, but it did turn out to be true. The statement released by the PSNI condemned the way the man was attacked, but it didn't deny what he was. Lo and behold, the man, who will remain nameless here, was convicted of offenses just a year or so prior and had moved over to Derry to start a new life. The paramilitaries tracked him down and told him to leave, and when he refused, they came for him. There's a lot of people, both at the time and now, who tell me they don't care if that guy was shot, how he got exactly what he deserved. And if he couldn't properly walk again, oh well, it meant our kids would be a wee bit safer. But I don't want to live in a place where that kind of violence is on view to the public. Civilized societies deal with their criminals without violence and away from the innocent eyes of children. They shot that man because he abused children, but what's shooting someone in front of children, if not child abuse as well? I'm not trying to equate the two, don't get me wrong, but I'd like to think that monsters can only live on the fringes of society, and I don't think I could handle the realization that monsters are all around me, just pretending to be normal, regular people, when really, they're just as savage and brutal as those they profess to hate.